Hey everyone! Today I'll be flipping through my 2025 Sterling Ink Common Planner. This is specifically the B6 Vertical Full Year version, and let's go ahead and jump right in. I named my planner Hazel, which is something I like to do with my planners and journals. I feel like it just personifies them and gives me someone to address when I'm writing my journal entries. We have a few yearly spreads here at the beginning. The blank spread that's included here in the front is what I use to write down my master bills list for the year, any future plans, as well as a when did I last tracker. Next, we have a goal breakdown spread that is intended to help you dissect your long-term or short-term goals into more approachable and bite-sized steps. We also have a yearly tracker spread, which was actually one of my favorite spreads from last year. I used this as a health tracker where I logged my periods, weight fluctuations, and exercises throughout the year. Moving on to the quarterly spreads, for the first half of the year, I used the left pages to write down monthly priorities, but later changed that to media trackers. I found this to be a better use for these pages and was more engaging for me to fill out. In terms of the vertical monthlies on the right page, I used those for habit tracking all year long, which worked out perfectly for me. I really enjoyed using these spreads, especially in the latter half of the year. Next, we have the monthly spreads. I love me a good monthly calendar layout in my planners, so I really don't have any complaints about these. I thought they worked out beautifully for the way that I like to do my monthly planning. To add some visual interest and cohesion, I like to include monthly themes in relation to the seasons. I felt like that allowed me to just be a little bit more in tune with the time of year I was in, as well as add a little creative element to these spreads. For these monthly calendars, I mainly used them as a way to allow me to see everything that was going on in that specific month at a glance. I wrote down any bills that were coming out, paydays, appointments, meetings, birthdays, events, and when videos would come out. On the left-hand sidebar, I specifically like to use this area for my monthly expense tracking. I currently have them covered up under a kraft sticky note for privacy reasons, but that's just some context as to what's underneath those. And as for below the monthly calendars, this is where I like to include any monthly to-dos or priorities that I'd like to complete during that month. I found that this was really helpful for tasks that didn't necessarily need to be done on a specific day or week, but just something that I wanted to accomplish before the end of the month. After the December monthly calendar, the planner includes a January 2026 calendar, which I have repurposed to track the advent calendar gifts from my sister. For the past few years, we've made each other custom advent calendars for Christmas, so I thought that this was the perfect use for the spare calendar to make it much more meaningful, and I really love how it turned out. In case you're new here, this was my first time using a dated planner in many years, and I do have a separate video going into all the specifics on how I used this planner and a more detailed review of the planner as a whole, which I will go ahead and link right here in case you'd like to check that out. Overall, I had a really wonderful experience with this planner last year. It was pretty bittersweet after completing it and knowing that it wasn't going to be a part of my 2026 lineup. But I would be more than happy to use another one of these in the future. I thought that the layouts included were very versatile and useful for beginners who are new to planning, but also very useful for seasoned planners. The spreads included aren't too intimidating and don't demand too much of your attention or time, which can't be said about some other planners that are currently on the market. I can be easily overwhelmed when there are too many collection spreads in a planner, and it can deter me from using them or following through with them the entire year. So I really appreciate the simple and easy approach when it came to setting up and using this planner last year, especially as someone who came from bullet journaling the 7 years prior. Like I mentioned in the beginning, this planner includes the vertical weekly spreads. Sterling Ink does offer horizontal layouts in their planners as well, but I wanted to try out something different for 2025. Prior to that, I had a strong preference for horizontal weekly layouts in my bullet journals, so I wanted to try something new, and one thing that really intrigued me about this vertical layout was the timeline on the side of each day. I wanted to add an element of time tracking to my weekly spreads by referencing the timeline, which I thought was very interesting and not anything that I had really done before 2025. I found it to be helpful when jotting down appointments or meetings that were scheduled for specific times. Then it gave me a visual representation of how my day would look around these obligations. It was definitely something that I didn't realize could be so beneficial to me until I practiced it in my planner. It allowed me to better plan out other tasks that I also needed to get done that day around those scheduled obligations. Because of the visual aspect, it was almost like a puzzle piece trying to see what I could fit in and accomplish between meetings or appointments. Before this, I was definitely the type of person where if I had an obligation later in the day, I couldn't do anything until that event was over, since I would be very anxious of getting distracted and missing it. But because of this timeline in my planner, I was able to actually see, for example, that I had like 45 minutes in between my meetings that day. I could easily work on emails during that time or complete a phone call or another quick task instead of sitting in anxiousness, accomplishing absolutely nothing. Another thing that I found very helpful with these weekly spreads was the left-hand sidebar. At the beginning of every week, I would use these areas to brain dump whatever's on my mind that I'd like to get done that week. I found that this was very helpful for me since I tend to be very forgetful. There have been many instances in the past where I'll just be daydreaming and thinking to myself all the things I need to get done before a certain day or event. But because I would typically only have 1 week set up at a time in my planner, and if it's not a task that needs to be done that same week, by the time I set up that week I originally planned to do said thing, I would have already forgotten what it was. So having these weekly brain dumps was so incredibly helpful for future me to remember to do things that past me wanted to get done. This also goes back to those monthly to-dos I mentioned earlier, where if it's something that won't need to be done for another couple of weeks, I can go back to my monthly to-do list and write it there. And whenever I do get around to setting up the later weekly spreads, I would remember to fit those to-dos somewhere during those weeks. I know it may sound pretty repetitive to some, but like I mentioned, I am a terribly forgetful person. So having several areas for reminders throughout my months and weeks was absolutely a game changer for me, and definitely something that I didn't realize how badly I needed until 2025. I hope that you've been enjoying this flip through so far. It's been so surreal flipping through this whole planner already. I feel like I just started this, and in the blink of an eye, it's already all filled in and another year has already gone by. As I'm sure you can tell by now, I am definitely a maximalist. I think it has something to do with a frugal trait that I have, since this is such a luxurious planner and definitely the most expensive I've ever splurged on. So a part of me would feel very wasteful if I didn't fill up as many pages as I possibly could. However, I absolutely love filling up these pages with a combination of planning and memory keeping. I know that some people can't fathom the idea of combining planning and journaling or memory keeping together, and it may just be how my brain is wired, but I have a really difficult time separating the two. The way I view my life is very much a combination of productivity and memory keeping, and in many ways, I find that the journaling adds a lot more context and meaning to the plans that I make, or to the productivity side of my life. I think if I were only to use my planner for strictly planning and productivity, I would probably need a very tiny planner since most of my days are pretty much made of the same routine. Chores, errands, appointments, go to work.
Okay, let's see my to-do list. Go to work, go to work, go to work, go to work, go to work.
There will be days where I accomplish a lot and have a huge to-do list all checked off. And then there will be days where only 1 or 2 things got done. And from past experiences, I'll always look at those days and wonder why or what happened. So with the addition of memory keeping or journaling about what I did that day and what I was thinking at the time and feeling provides so much more context for me when I'm looking back at these pages. I know this would not be your concern if you throw out your planners at the end of the year, but I am a very sentimental person and get very attached to my planners and journals. They're physical books that I've documented about specific times in my life. And I think that it'll be very interesting to look back at these when I'm very much removed from this point in my life and can no longer remember this current season that I'm in anymore. I include all of this context as if I'm documenting all of this for a stranger, because that's ultimately what the future me is going to be, looking back at all these entries. A stranger. My life will likely look very different in the future compared to what it is now. And as I keep coming back to, I already have an awful memory now. There is no chance future me is magically going to have better memory then, so I have to try and set her up for success. Anyway, that got a little too deep and borderline morbid there, so I would love to know if you're also someone who likes to plan and journal in the same book, or do you prefer to keep them separated? I'm interested to see how many of us are out there. Now we've reached the notebook section of the planner. In case you're unfamiliar, the full year common planner comes with 367 of these blank graph pages in the back. Some people like to use these pages to do even more detailed and specific daily planning and have 1 day per page, because there's certainly enough pages to do that. The way I used these pages was essentially like a notebook. You'll see that a lot of these pages are filled with journal entries for the most part. Although I do like to keep my planning and some daily journaling together, I do typically keep a completely separate diary for my more personal and deeper thoughts. Because I show my planners on camera, I prefer to keep those journal entries more surface level and lighthearted. For about the first half of 2025, I used the majority of these back pages as my diary since I wanted to experiment with having my planner and diary all in one. However, it only lasted half a year because I like to journal a lot. I prefer to keep one planner throughout the entire year, but I typically go through 3 to 4 diaries a year with how much I write. Sprinkled in every now and then, I also took some notes on the most random topics. I researched the different flower breeding combinations in Animal Crossing New Horizons. I sketched out my ideal island. I took notes on Ryder Carroll's rapid logging system. At one point, I wrote down some notes on my birth chart. Just a mishmash of random things that caught my interest throughout the year that I wanted to document. It's fun looking back on them now and remembering what I was into at the time. There are also several pages dedicated to planner layouts. I experimented with how different weekly layouts would look, the possibility of color coding my tasks instead of my usual black gel pen. I tested out weekly formats in an A6 size, as well as dabbled with daily planning instead of weekly spreads. It's funny looking back at these spreads now and seeing how early in the year I was already brainstorming my planner for 2026. At the beginning of the year, I was really uncertain whether or not I liked the common planner. Looking back, I know now that it was just my anxiety acting up from being outside of my comfort zone, but I was determined to see the common planner through the entire year and not give up on it immediately, just because it felt foreign at the time. As previously mentioned, I was so used to creating my own layouts in my planner when I bullet journaled before, so being in a dated planner was definitely something I had to adjust to. I started brainstorming about other systems and whether or not they would work better for me. I planned out entire planners, seeing if it would be something that fit my needs. And this is really just part of my process in narrowing down planners, since there are so many on the market and many of them look very desirable and fun. I would absolutely love to try them all, but this is just a way for me to narrow down whether or not these planners would actually even work for me by drawing out some of their weekly or daily layouts and testing them out for a couple days or even a whole week. This process ultimately helps me save money by not buying a ton of planners I may or may never find a use for, and it saves me time that would be spent trying to get a planner to work for me after already purchasing it. I find it difficult to juggle multiple planners at a time. I know that many people find it very useful in their lives, which is very admirable. I'm just not that type of person, at least at this point in my life. Things can of course always change later on, and as different things come up in my life, but as for right now, I much prefer to just keep everything all in one planner for the entire year. The more I have to divide my brain and section specific things off into their own planners, the more I'm likely to accidentally add the wrong thing into one planner and then forget to add it in the correct one, and it ends up making me not trust myself that I'm documenting everything accurately and in the correct spots. It becomes a little too complicated and convoluted for me, so it's much easier for me to keep everything together in one planner, regardless of if it's work or personal related. I know I'm rambling a lot in this video, and I apologize if it's all over the place and not making any sense, but it is something that I see discussed a lot in the planner community and the debate between multiple planner systems versus one single planner for the entire year. At this current point in my life, I'm very much a single planner person. I just don't find that my lifestyle warrants multiple planners, but I do see why others would find multiple planners useful if they're very busy and involved with many different activities. If I'm being completely honest though, and this may come off A little bit spicy and controversial, but I think some people use the multi-planner system as an excuse to justify their excessive and impulsive planner purchases. Like I said, I could totally understand it if you have a very demanding full-time job, but are also a homemaker, have kids with busy schedules and their own activities to keep track of, and if you have classes you're taking or other social obligations you're a part of that need to keep track of. But aside from those, I really can't wrap my mind around why anyone would need several planners for a single year. And because there are so many pretty and aesthetic planners on the market, just like any other item that can be purchased, there's bound to be unreasonable and excessive spending on these products. And especially in the planner world, they're intended to be used for one specific year. Sure, you can go in and cover up the year and dates and use it at any point in time or wait until the next year that all the dates line up again, but chances are a new planner would come out within this time that these people would likely end up purchasing a brand new planner anyway. I think it's really important that when someone purchases a planner, that they already have a purpose for it and the discipline to commit to it for however long it spans. All of this is to say that hopefully we can just be more mindful with our planner purchases and think about why we're making these purchases and not on impulse or because something simply looked cute. I'm sure I'm probably going to get some pushback on that, so I'm just going to leave that there. I do encourage you to leave any feedback and comments, however, please do so respectfully as we all have differing opinions and there really is no right or wrong way to do anything, so I do very much value your insight. Anyway, moving on to lighter topics. This was the year that I really fell in love with fountain pens and fountain pen inks, so you may have already seen many swatches of my ink hauls over the past year. I've had so much fun trying out new pens and inks, testing out different colors and properties. I've learned a lot about my fountain pen and ink preferences over this past year. At this point in time, I have a strong preference for pens with medium nib sizes, since I find them to write smoother and don't feel scratchy to me like how some finer nibs can feel. I also found that some fountain pens can be quite heavy for my hands due to the materials used to make them, so I discovered that I much prefer lighter pen bodies. At first, I really loved shimmery inks, but found that a lot of the ones that I tried had the tendency to clog my fountain pens, unfortunately. So I've since preferred inks that have interesting shading properties, whether it be a deeper shade of the same color or a completely different color altogether. It's been so much fun experimenting with different ink colors that can't really be found in traditional gel pens or markers. Now, in terms of the paper, I did run into some inks and markers that didn't behave too well. I found that when I would use a glass dip pen to journal with, the pen would apply too much ink all at once, which would then bleed through the page. I found this to be the case especially with Jacques Herbin's Emerald of Chivor. For some reason, that ink just did not want to cooperate when I used it. Also, Noodler's Georgia Peach, for whatever reason, was notorious for feathering and bleeding through the pages. I'm curious to know if any of you have used that ink on Sanzin Tomoe River paper as well, and what your experience has been like. Also, the Zebra Click Art retractable markers had the tendency to show through the pages quite heavily as well. They never quite bled through the page, but they would always be on the verge of bleeding through. So that's something you may want to keep in mind if you too have those markers and want to use them on 52 GSM Sanzin Tomoe River paper. Aside from those specific products, I really didn't run into too many other issues with the paper. Going into this planner, I was prepared for the ghosting due to how thin the paper is, and I was okay with that. For the planning sections at the beginning of this book, I mainly used a black gel pen when writing, specifically the Uniball One 0.38mm gel pen. For these back pages, however, I mainly journaled with fountain pens or fountain pen ink. After using the glass dip pen for a while and seeing how much ink it would dispense onto the page all at once, as well as accidentally chipping it later on when I was cleaning it, I eventually switched to a Pilot Iro-Utsushi dip pen to journal with simply by dipping it into whatever ink sample I wanted to try. I highly recommend those for writing samples since it's just like a fountain pen without having to fill it up with ink and going through the whole cleaning process. You just dip it into your desired ink and are able to start journaling right then and there. And when you're done, you can just rinse off the nib and let it dry. I specifically use the medium nib size just so that it can somewhat emulate the medium nib sized fountain pens that I have. Also, in case you're wondering where I got kind of like these scenic stickers from that I've been using to decorate my journal entries with, I got them a long time ago from journalsay.com. I guess I'm not sure if they still have them exactly, but that's just where I got them from, so in case you're curious in them, feel free to check out their site and see if they have any selections that you may like. Later in the year, I was very inspired by Karina from Karina Loves to Plan and how she paints beautiful roses with her inks. I tried swatching them out and painting roses myself, but I definitely need to practice more as they're not as pretty as hers. But I really enjoyed painting with ink and would love to do more of this in the future. As we get to the last few pages back here, I drew some doodles and painted them in with ink. Specifically ink samples that I had a very small amount left in the vials and wasn't enough to fill inside a pen anymore. I didn't want them to go to waste, so I figured I could practice painting with them. They're not the best drawings or paintings in the world, but it was fun seeing how the different inks reacted on the paper, and a nice way to use up the small amount of ink that was left. I also taped in a rose and some foliage from a bouquet my husband had gotten for me for our anniversary, just for some memories. I didn't do the best job at drawing them out, but it is what it is, I guess. And for the final pages, I pasted in the cards from the advent calendar where my sister explained basically like the story behind each gift. I thought they were so cute and wanted a place to keep them. On the inside of the back cover, I pasted in a few random items from December that I thought were really cute. And that does it for my 2025 Sterling Ink Common Planner flip through. I really hope that you enjoyed this video. I didn't know how interesting this would be for anyone, but just wanted to share it for anyone looking for inspiration on how you can use a common planner or any similar planner. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you being here and taking the time to tune in. Let me know your thoughts, or what planner did you use for 2025 and what did you think of it? Next week, I'll be flipping through my 2025 A6 Hobonichi Hon that I used solely for memory keeping, so be sure to stay tuned for that. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.